But anybody on the road with cattle, well, he wasn't like, he was just a nuisance on the road if he never had a good dog, because they'd clear a track for cars and all that sort of thing. But there was always a danger on the road after the war when a bit of traffic got about. A lot of good dogs concentrating on their work, and idiots driving cars. Like country people, most of them were all right, but look, some people, you'd be trying to cross a bridge with sturdy cattle or something like that, and they come blowing the horn and get your stock off the road. But still, that's still idiots on the road, isn't it? But as I say, with dogs, even in those days, back when it was £10 a week, a good dog, nothing for £80, £100 for a dog to change hands. Well, of course, at Casterton now, I think they're up to around about 3,000 for a good Kelpie dog. But I couldn't praise dogs enough. I mean, I could tell you about good horsemen and so forth, or so good stockmen, but there was the good dogs. I can, you know, I always admired a good dog.
And was there some dogs that were better in yards? Can you tell us about yard dogs?
The yard dogs weren't used with cattle. They weren't, to my knowledge, never used to yard cattle. Used to yard cattle, but not in the yards. They were used in the yards, of course, with sheep. And a good sheepdog was pretty to watch up over the backs, and even, well, I think Fred Wilson, who was a very good cattle transporter, sheep transporter, and the Wilsons had really good truck dogs. They were another type of dog altogether. Syddy Wilson, Fred, and those fellas, those dogs were worth, well, any amount, and no number of men could do what a good yard dog could do with sheep. And with cattle, a good dog, different, like a good paddock dog, you'd be able to put a good dog round cattle and stop him if he was getting them too stirred up and that sort of thing, and forcing dogs to get them into a yard. I can skite about 2 dogs that I had. They were really good dogs. One was bred by Reggie Wilson, an old breed that he'd had for years, and he was a wonderful dog, only he couldn't stand heat. He was a very woolly fella, and on a hot day, he'd just have to get in the shade. And I had a little bitch that I'd got off Goffy Thomas, a Dave Wright breed. She was a wonderful little bitch, and she'd worked till she was exhausted. But this, if you were having trouble, you know, forcing sheep or cattle along, and the old dog was lying in the shade, you only had to pat the bitch and out he'd come and he'd give you another burst. But to yard cattle, they were good dogs. They were really good dogs. So that's enough on the dogs, but Jack Doyle always had good dogs, mainly sheep. Jack was more a sheep man than cattle, although he'd work cattle. He drove cattle for Malseed, but he always had a good dog. But of course, if you were working with dogs in the paddock all the time, or on the roads all the time, they had brains. You could teach some dogs. You couldn't teach anything. So that's about it, you know.
Good. So, horsemen?
Well, there was horsemen and cowboys. Now, Sam Kennedy, an uncle of mine, he was a very good cowboy. There was hardly a horse who could throw him. But he'd carry on like a cowboy. He'd gallop and yell and roar and crack whips. And the really good horsemen, there was plenty of them about. There was the Bullocks in Hamilton, and the old fella from Branksholme, probably the best of the lot, Joey Atkinson, still alive, I think. But they loved the buck jumpers, you know. Sam Malseed never had a horse that anybody else could ride. He was the only one who could ride it, because if it didn't buck, it was no good to him. You know, he was, but he was a good horseman. He served a lot of time in the Northern Territory. He one time was head stockman on Victoria River Downs, and he was in the Gulf country. Like he he knew stock and that sort of thing, but he had to go about it in a cowboy way, whereas the likes of old Donald Ferguson off Lower Crawford, poking about on a very quiet little old horse with a wonderful dog, like he was a better stockman. If I could tell you a tale about two of the old stockmen that was told to me years ago, Tommy Wilson and Donald Ferguson took a mob of cattle away up to a station the other side of Casterton somewhere, delivered these cattle. And a big property, and they had wild, very wild cattle on it, bad cattle to handle. And there was a mob of bullocks in a big paddock that nobody could get out. They just couldn't get them out of the paddock. And they'd been clearing land. There was an offer, I think it was £10 or £20 to yard these mob of cattle. Well, Wilson and Ferguson, they were top stockmen with top dogs. So they said they'd get them in. Now they'd been clearing this great big hundreds of acres of red gum and had heaps of red gum out clear country there, and red gum, thick red gum bush behind. And the cattle would come out on, the bullocks would come out to feed on the clear country, and as soon as the horsemen come on the scene, yahooing and yelling, away would go the bullocks into the scrub, and that was the last they'd see of them. So the old fellas said it'll take us a week. So they camped in their roll, just, in the open, and they camped back in the bush, and the bullocks would go out and feed, and they'd go out with their dogs at heel on the horses and go nowhere near the bullocks. They'd go nowhere to disturb the bullocks for 4 or 5 days. And the bullocks got used to seeing them between the clear country and the bush. So when the wind was right, the old fellas went along and lit the bullocks were out in the clear, and they went along and they lit all the heaps up, you see, and the smoke and the burning fires that the bullocks weren't used to, they kept away from them, they kept out in the clear. So they then let their dogs loose. They had them in the paddock and the honey in the pocket. So there was no galloping, they didn't raise a horse out of a trot. Which is, as anyone knows, I mean, you get a stirred up wild beast, you won't beat it. I mean, you can finish up, you'll put it through the closest fence. Donald Ferguson from Lower Crawford, he was grown up, I don't know where, I think they came from Casterton, the Fergusons. He was married, his wife was a Kitson, one of the Kitsons from Bridgewater, and the old fellow was as deaf as a beetle. You had to speak right into his ear, and he was tough. He'd head off with a few biscuits and a small bottle of tea and his oilskin, and he'd camp in a drain. The old fella, he was known, he'd camp in a drain, and he had wonderful dogs. He was very hard on his dogs. Anybody, I remember as a kiddie, he used to come to the place at Lyons where, for Christmas dinner. Mum would always have Jack Doyle and those people in for Christmas dinner. But it was taboo to touch his dog. If you went to pat his dog, he'd flog it. And he always had marvellous dogs, you see. And he'd camp with his cattle. It didn't worry him. It didn't worry him if he come to, he'd know where every camp was, which is a blind lane, for instance. And he'd camp at the end of the lane with his horse on a tether and his dog there. And that's like, and he'd live off, well, those biscuits would do him for 2 or 3 days. He was just a tough old bushman, a really old bushman. And I understand that Tommy Wilson was, the old original Tommy Wilson was much the same. They were really good stockmen, really good stockmen. Tommy Wilson one time was riding across the country, I think Dingo Dell out here behind Drumborg, and he come across these nice Hereford heifers with a young Jersey bull. Dave Wright, Vic Wright's father, was with him. Vic Wright would tell you this tale. So that's no good, Tom, he said. They don't want that bull in there. So they downed the bull and cut him in the paddock. They cut him, castrated the bull in the paddock. He was no good. They didn't want any brindle Herefords about, you see. But they must have been a law unto themselves. Well, now, there was an instance on film here a while ago. I think it was on film a while ago, where there was a mob of cows and calves around, bellowing around here. Now, I understand that those cattle belong to Fred Wilson, and he handles those cattle a lot. He feeds them hay. Hay is the greatest quieter in the world with wild cattle. He doesn't seal dogs onto them. He shifts them from one paddock to another by following the ute. You get a cowboy. Now, I refer to some really good horsemen, the Woodall fellows. Now, they're buck jump riders and so forth. And Sam Kennedy, they'd be down the paddock, cracking the whip and yelling and roaring and have those cattle up here as hard as they could run. Whereas those old stockmen, they just poked about and they got to know their cattle. They got to know the leaders of their cattle and all that sort of thing. And they were tough. Reg Wilson told me one time years ago that when he was a little boy, he went for a trip with Donald Ferguson and his father with a big mob of cattle up Cassidy Way somewhere. He had a little pony. And he said they talked all the way. Old Donald was telling Tommy Wilson, we've got a good camp tonight. We've got a really good camp. So-and-so, we'll leave the cattle in so-and-so's lane somewhere up near Marina there. And anyway, they turned the cattle down the lane after they'd watered them somewhere and turned them down the lane. Yeah, they'll be right. They put a dog one end of the lane, and in the other end of the lane was a big hollow log, a big red gum that had been burnt out. That was Donald's good camp for the night. He'd had a good camp for the night. Now that come from Reggie, and he said that always stuck in his mind. He coiled up between them. He said his father had a blanket, Donald had an oilskin. A fire burning outside, you see.
In the hollow log?
In a hollow log, in a big hollow log. And he told me that would have been truth. Like Reggie was a pretty tough fellow himself. And now, yeah, bloody oath. That's why I say I couldn't speak. I think when it comes to the cattle industry, really I suppose the individual first, the dog next, and then the horse. I mean the dog, even up in that Northern Territory country and that, you know, they use dogs. Some place they don't because of burr and heat and all that sort of thing, but the brains of a clever dog, Border Collie, Kelpie, those dogs, and even those German Curlies, they were good dogs, weren't they? Good cattle dogs. This tiger had blue eyes, you know, he had the German Curly in him.
Yeah, I had one of those.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready for action. My late brother Morris, the eldest brother, he was a good stockman. Yeah, a very good stockman. Good cattleman. Worked his cattle, not quite as steadily as Donald Ferguson, but had good and knew cattle and had good cattle and knew it. And once a year he would have a special sale of not always cattle that he'd bred, but mostly, predominantly cattle that he'd bred, or perhaps good cattle that he'd bought in. But the point was, that had to be a special sale, which was understandable because, you know, it was a special type of cattle. But nobody else was allowed to take any cattle there. That was, I suppose, he was the vendor, so he could stipulate, oh, well, that'll be right. Well, Joe Blower's got some nice cattle. Well, no, he can bring them to the next sale. I suppose Morris's theory was if my cattle are there, they're the only ones they can buy. Perhaps it was, I don't know, because they were always good sales. And, he liked, not in latter life when he became a sick man, but he used to like a drink. Well, in the Hayward Hotel after the sale, the auctioneers, they were round him like flies round a bit of raw meat of a hot day. And of course he didn't have to buy any grog, which suited the brother Morris, like he didn't waste a lot of money. But that was the special sales. I think that was the only one that was like that. I can't ever remember another sale, unless it be on a property sort of thing, where in a public yard where it was a private sale, like it was really a private sale. But by the same token, he done very well, and he done extremely well, and he passed away some years ago. His wife is still living in Portland. She's still living anyway. But there were a lot, the Trouse, but I don't think their cattle were ever really top quality. Like, you used to admire them. Me as a kid, I suppose, bred in me from way back, but Freddie Wilson the same. You can pick a good beast out. I mean, even if that's a good black cow there, and you remember cattle and that, and remember beasts. You're taught they all learn, they're natural things. The same as perhaps some people can go out and catch crayfish when nobody else can. I mean, it's just things that you learn.
Yep. So you're talking about the coast. Morris had cattle down on the coast.
Yeah, he owned 1,000 acres on the coast. Getting back to the cattlemen around the district, touching back on that, I've mentioned the brother Morris. Now, another brother, a younger brother than me, he was always, as far as I was concerned...
Just a minute, a younger brother than me, was it Ross?
No, Ross was older. Harold. Harold.
Just start again.
Yeah. A younger brother than me, Harold, whose nickname was Skinner. He was known everywhere as Skinner, and he was a character in his own right. He was a character. He liked people to think he was a bit different, but the only way he was different, he was more cunning. But he always, to me, and my mother was a wonderful judge of stock, he was a better judge of stock than the brother Morris. He didn't have anything like the scope of country